The BTK killer night descends over a quiet Wichita neighborhood. The camera slowly glides past streetlights, falling shadows, and silent houses. Inside one modest home, soft piano music drifts through an open window. A young mother plays, unaware of the figure creeping near her porch. He wears a utility helmet, a Southwest Bell manual tucked under one arm. He carries the deceptive guise of a telephone technician. He knocks softly on the door. She opens. He speaks in calm, measured tones. "I'm here to check the telephone lines." She steps aside, trusting. The door closes behind him. A chilling struggle ensues. The woman fights for her life, scratching his face fiercely. Outside, dogs bark. Time is running out. He pulls a gun. The room falls silent, save for the distant wail of approaching sirens. A flash of a camera shutter. He takes photos, trophies to preserve his control and power. Then, darkness, cut to black. This was Dennis Rader, a man who stalked, bound, tortured, and killed 10 victims over 3 decades. To the world, he was the BTK killer, a shadow that haunted Wichita, Kansas. Behind the facade of a devoted family man, church president, and Boy Scout leader, Rader hid a darkness that would eventually terrorize a community and confound law enforcement for decades. Dennis Lynn Rader was born March 9, 1945, in Pittsburgh, Kansas. Raised in Wichita, he was the youngest of 3 children in a seemingly normal family. But beneath the surface, young Dennis nurtured dark impulses. He later admitted to torturing and killing animals during his youth. His mind became consumed with violent fantasies, many involving bondage and control. Psychologists would later classify him as a sadistic serial killer, someone who derived pleasure from the suffering and domination of others. In the 1960s, Rader enlisted in the U.S. Air Force, serving honorably for several years before returning to Wichita in 1970. He married Paula Dietz, with whom he had 2 children. Rader was outwardly ordinary. He held various jobs, including factory work at the Coleman Company, makers of camping gear. He pursued higher education, studying criminal justice at Wichita State University, graduating in 1979. His employment at ADT, a home security company, gave him access and knowledge that he would exploit with deadly precision. On January 15, 1974, Rader's brutal spree began. That day, he broke into the Wichita home of the Otero family. 4 members of the family, including 2 children, were strangled to death. Though no sexual assault occurred, Rader left behind a signature: semen and stolen items, notably a watch from the home. This marked the start. Later in 1974, Rader sent a chilling letter to the Wichita police. He detailed the murders and coined the phrase that would become his chilling moniker. "The code words for me will be: bind them, torture them, kill them. BTK." He left this letter hidden in a book at the Wichita Public Library, taunting authorities and showcasing his twisted need for recognition. Over the next 2 decades, Rader's crimes escalated, each more brazen than the last. His victims were often women he stalked, learning their routines. He broke into their homes posing as a repairman or utility worker, using his ADT background to gain trust. In March 1977, he strangled a woman after locking her 3 children in a bathroom. Later that year, frustrated by a lack of media attention, he sent another letter asking, "How many people do I have to kill before I get a name in the paper or some national attention?" This taunt generated public panic and increased police scrutiny. Following this, Rader disappeared for 8 years, leaving a void of fear and speculation. But in 1985, he resumed killing, now escalating in ritual. He abducted and murdered a neighbor, later taking her body to his church and photographing her bound in bondage. In 1986, a 28-year-old mother of two fell victim to his depraved crimes, followed by his last known murder in 1991, strangling a 62-year-old woman in her secluded home. For years, the case went cold. Then in 2004, exactly 30 years after his first murders, the killer re-emerged. He began sending letters, photographs, and other evidence to local media, including a driver's license stolen from one of his victims. He even left serial killer cereal boxes containing drawings, photos, and cryptic notes across Wichita. In January 2005, raiders sent police a floppy disk with taunting messages. Unaware of modern technology, he left metadata embedded in a deleted Microsoft Word document. That metadata led investigators directly to the Christ Lutheran Church, where Rader served as president of the church council. Armed with DNA evidence from the first crime scene, matched to Rader's family through his daughter, police arrested him near his home on February 25, 2005. Rader's demeanor remained calm. When asked if he knew why he was being taken downtown, he replied, "Oh, I have suspicions why." He confessed to all 10 murders. His shock at police deception — they had told him the floppy disk was untraceable — was palpable. In June 2005, Rader pled guilty. 2 months later, he received 10 consecutive life sentences, avoiding the death penalty. He remains imprisoned, a chilling reminder of evil lurking beneath a mask of normality. Dennis Rader's case remains one of the most haunting chapters in American criminal history. A man who was a devoted family figure by day and a sadistic predator by night. His chilling mantra, "Bind, torture, kill," echoes as a stark warning. Evil sometimes hides in plain sight. Visual. A dim street corner bathed in the cold glow of streetlights. A teenage girl, small and vulnerable, stands alone, backpack slung over one shoulder. Aiko Ku, 15 years old, waits quietly, nervous but determined to get to her dance class. It was the evening of September 14, 1972. Aiko Ku had missed her bus and decided to hitchhike to her dance class, a choice that would seal her fate. Headlights approach, casting long shadows. A large car pulls over, its driver a towering man with an unnerving calmness. Inside the car, tension grows. The driver, Edmund Kemper, produces a gun, but an accident causes the door to lock behind him, trapping them both. Aiko's fear battles her instinct to survive, and in a moment that would haunt many, she lets him back inside. What followed was a night of unspeakable horror. The man behind the wheel, Edmund Kemper, would become one of America's most notorious serial killers, known by many names. The Co-Ed Killer, the Ogre of Aptos, Big Ed. But before the darkness, there was a boy. And the story of Edmund Kemper begins not in a shadowed forest or on a lonely road, but in the fractured home of a towering child, plagued by torment and trauma. Edmund Emil Kemper III was born on December 18, 1948 in Burbank, California. The middle child and only son of Clarnell Elizabeth Kemper and Edmund Emil Kemper Jr., he was destined to stand out, both literally and figuratively. By the age of 4, Edmund was a full head taller than most of his peers, eventually growing to a staggering 6 feet 9 inches. But his height was only the surface of his otherness. From a young age, Kemper exhibited disturbing behavior. He played cruel rites with his younger sister's dolls, removing their heads and hands. When teased by his sister about kissing his teacher, His reply was chilling. "If I kiss her, I'd have to kill her first." Kemper's fascination with death and violence began early. He would sneak out of the house armed with his father's bayonet, spying on his second-grade teacher through her windows. His favorite games were grim simulations of death, pretending to be executed by gas chamber or electric chair, asking his younger sister to tie him up and flip an imaginary switch. The emotional landscape of Kemper's childhood was bleak. His parents divorced when he was a young boy in 1961 after years of acrimony. His mother, Clarnell, was a domineering, neurotic alcoholic who frequently belittled and humiliated him. She once locked him in a basement, fearing he might harm his sisters. She called him a weirdo. Unaware, he overheard her conversations. Kemper described her in later interviews as big, ugly, and awkward, a sick, angry woman who filled his early life with conflict and rejection. His father was a World War II veteran, an electrician who had tested nuclear weapons, a man hardened by war but unable to protect his son from the family dysfunction. His elder sister pushed him dangerously, once trying to shove him in front of a train, another time nearly drowning him in a swimming pool. Cruelty to animals is often a harbinger in the psyche of violent offenders. By age 10, Kemper had buried a family cat alive, only to dig it up, decapitate it, and mount its head on a spike. He later admitted to feeling pleasure in successfully lying about the incident. At 13, he killed another family cat he suspected favored his sister over him, keeping parts of the body in his closet. At just 15 years old, Kemper's darkest impulses exploded into horrific reality. On August 27, 1964, following an argument, Kemper murdered his grandmother, Maud Kemper, shooting her multiple times and stabbing her repeatedly. When his grandfather returned home, Kemper shot him in the driveway. After the murders, he calmly called his mother, who instructed him to call the police. "I just wanted to see what it felt like to kill Grandma," Kemper would later say. Despite the brutality, court psychiatrists found it incomprehensible that a boy so young could commit such acts. Diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, he was sent to Atascadero State Hospital, a maximum security facility for mentally ill convicts. Kemper's time at Atascadero proved both revealing and chilling. Subsequent psychiatrists contradicted the initial diagnosis, finding no signs of psychosis or hallucinations. He was noted for his intelligence. His IQ tested at 136, later 145, well above average. He was a model prisoner, assisting with psychiatric tests and even developing psychological scales. Yet behind the facade was a man carefully studying the minds of others, learning how to manipulate. On his 21st birthday, December 18, 1969, Kemper was released on parole. Against psychiatric recommendations, he was placed under the care of his mother, Clarnell, in Aptos, California. Their relationship remained volatile, filled with vicious, violent arguments. Kemper described their battles. Their relationship remained volatile, filled with vicious, violent arguments. Kemper described their battles as horrendous and vicious, worse than any fight he'd had with a man. Though Kemper tried to forge a normal life, working menial jobs and attending community college, his massive size and troubled mind isolated him. He aspired to be a police officer but was rejected due to his height. In 1971, Kemper began working for the State of California Division of Highways. He noticed many young women hitchhiking near Santa Cruz and began picking them up. At first, he simply gave rides. But soon his little zapples, homicidal sexual urges, began driving him. Between May 1972 and April 1973, Kemper killed 8 people, 6 female college students, 1 high school student, his mother, and his mother's best friend. Kemper lured victims by posing as a friendly, trustworthy driver. Once isolated, He would handcuff, strangle, shoot, or stab them. He then transported their bodies to his mother's house, where he performed grotesque acts: necrophilia, decapitation, dismemberment. On May 7, 1972, Kemper picked up two 18-year-old hitchhikers, Mary Ann Pesci and Anita Lucchesa. He handcuffed Pesci, locked Lucchesa in the trunk, then stabbed and strangled Pesci. Later, he killed Lucchesa similarly. Their bodies were brought to his apartment, where Kemper photographed and engaged in acts with the corpses. He dismembered the bodies and disposed of them in plastic bags. Kemper admitted that while handcuffing Pesci, his hand brushed against one of her breasts, and he apologized, despite murdering her minutes later. He selected victims he deemed better class, not scroungy, messy, dirty, smelly hippie type. A foggy evening at the Cabrillo College campus. A young woman, Cindy Shaw, 18 years old, boards a car alone, unaware that the man behind the wheel is Edmund Kemper, a predator whose monstrous urge grows darker. On January 7, 1973, Cindy Shaw took a ride that would be her last. After moving back in with his mother, Kemper's killing took a darker turn. On that cold January night, he picked up Cindy Shaw near Cabrillo College. He drove her to a secluded wooded area, where he shot her with a .22 caliber pistol. Kemper concealed her body in the trunk and brought it home. That night he committed some of his most gruesome acts. He had sex with Cindy's corpse and then dismembered her in his mother's bathtub. Kemper kept Cindy's severed head for several days, engaging in ritualistic acts with it, including irrumatio. He buried her head in his mother's garden, facing it upward toward her bedroom, a chilling act of psychological domination. The rest of her body was discarded off a cliff. In early February 1973, after yet another brutal argument with his mother, Kemper ventured out with renewed ferocity. He obtained a university sticker to blend in, a fact his mother's employment at UC Santa Cruz facilitated. Kemper picked up Rosalind Thorpe, 23, and Allison Liu, 20, on the UCSC campus. After shooting Thorpe execution style, Kemper fired multiple times at Liu, who cowered in the back seat before succumbing. He wrapped their bodies in blankets, transported them home, and again decapitated and dismembered them. Kemper later explained the decapitations as a head trip, where the head represented the essence of the victim, their personhood. The heads were trophies in his warped psyche, symbols of control and possession. April 20, 1973. The end of Kemper's reign of terror was near. His mother, Clarnell Strandberg, arrived home from a party. Kemper waited until she fell asleep before striking. He bludgeoned her with a claw hammer, slit her throat, then beheaded her. He humiliated her corpse, screaming at it, throwing darts, smashing her face. He cut out her tongue and larynx and put them in the garbage disposal, which could not destroy them. Kemper's brutal treatment of his mother's corpse was a manifestation of years of rage, abuse, and twisted love-hate. He hid her body in a closet, then went out drinking. Upon return, Kemper invited his mother's best friend, 59-year-old Sally Hallett, over. He strangled her and hid her corpse in the closet. He left a chilling note to the police, taunting them with his lack of time and calling himself a murderous butcher. Terrified by the consequences, Kemper fled to Pueblo, Colorado, over 1,000 miles away. Armed with 3 guns and hundreds of rounds of ammunition, he believed the police were hunting him. When he heard no news of his mother or Hallett's murders on the radio, he called the police himself. After an initial dismissal, he called back, demanding to speak to a familiar officer. He confessed and waited for the police to arrest him. Kemper was indicted on 8 counts of first-degree murder. His defense entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. 3 court-appointed psychiatrists evaluated him and declared him sane. One psychiatrist testified that Kemper had engaged in cannibalism, allegations Kemper later recanted. California law required proof that Kemper was unaware of the nature or wrongfulness of his acts. Kemper showed malice aforethought and awareness of his crimes. He took the stand, admitting to killing his victims because he wanted them for myself, like possessions. He claimed multiple personalities and blackouts. After 5 hours of deliberation, the jury found Kemper sane and guilty on all counts. Kemper requested the death penalty, even death by torture. But with a moratorium on capital punishment, he was sentenced to 8 concurrent life terms. He was sent to California Medical Facility in Vacaville. Kemper was re-diagnosed with antisocial, narcissistic, and schizotypal personality disorders. In prison, Kemper shared a block with killers like Herbert Mullen and Charles Manson. He manipulated and intimidated Mullen, a man shorter by a foot. He used behavioral tactics to control his environment, demonstrating his intellect and coldness. Kemper became known as a model inmate. He scheduled psychiatric appointments for others and crafted ceramic cups. He narrated audiobooks for the visually impaired, dedicating thousands of hours. Kemper expressed regret, saying he could no longer handle the folly of his acts. He recognized the emotional toll his killings exacted, leading to his surrender. Edmund Kemper remains a chilling reminder of how trauma, intelligence, and darkness can intertwine in a human being. His crimes shocked a nation, not only for their brutality, but for the cold calculation and psychological complexity behind them. His story is a tragic warning of the consequences of unchecked violence and neglect, a window into the mind of a monster. A rusted Chevy station wagon grinds to a halt on a narrow mountain road near Felton, California, at dusk. Inside, Herbert Mullen, 25, wide-eyed, stares at the engine, feigning distress. He steps out, feigning a flat tire, pulling his jacket tighter against the chill. A figure appears in the headlights. Lawrence, Whitey White, a wandering drifter, strolls over, offers help. Mullen's lips part in a strange half-smile. The woods around them swallow every sound except the distant buzz of cicadas. Then, in slow motion, Mullen lifts a heavy wood-grain baseball bat. The first blow is sharp, loud, echoing through the pines. Whitey's startled cry is cut short. The next strike crushes bones. Mullen doesn't hesitate. He drums the bat again, then drags the body to the roadside woods, disappearing as birds flurry overhead. That night, Mullen walks home. The voices inside his head are louder than the forest. His father's voice, haunting, insistent. They're asking you. They need you to save them. He believes he's stopping an earthquake, sacrificing one life so California will stay intact. He returns to Felton, washes the bat, wipes the sweat-flecked fingerprints, and lies in bed. Outside, the mountain winds whisper, as if in agreement. Back in his parents' home, modest wood-shingle charm, Mullen paints a map on the wall, with red lines marking seismic zones. April 18th, the anniversary of the 1906 San Francisco quake, becomes circled in red, surrounded by scribbled prayers and equations, testing his hypothesis. Enough death, no quake. He becomes convinced he must kill again. 3 nights later, Mullen scouts Cabrillo College's outskirts. He spots Mary Margaret Guilfoyle, 24, in hiking boots, with rolled-up sleeves, waiting for a ride. She smiles when he stops. "You heading up the hill?" He nods, says he's going to check a friend's car. Mary climbs in. They drive silently, the old Orpheum-era radio crackling. In a quiet pull-off, Mullen pulls a small knife. Fear floods Mary's eyes. She gasps, but he doesn't stop to ask forgiveness, just slits her throat, then stabs again. He thinks she's his father, urging him on. After death, he disembowels her. He hangs her intestines like a grotesque altar beneath branch boughs. He says to them, "Tell me, are you clean or polluted?" A month later, hikers discover her torso. The body is so mutilated, investigators suspect the co-ed killer, Ed Kemper, whose height and brutality echo in rumors that plague local news. Mullen retreats, terrified and exhilarated. He stops taking LSD. Damn Reagan-era funding cuts that closed clinics. But the voices scar louder. They've shifted from kill to stop the quake, to confess to a priest to test your faith. On November 2nd, All Souls Day, he pulls into the parking lot of St. Mary's Catholic Church in Los Gatos. He kneels in the confessing booth, trembling. "I have sinned." Father Henri Tomei, 64, leans in. Mullen drops to his knees, but confusion overtakes him. This man represents salvation and destruction. He stands, stabs Father Tomei in a frenzy repeatedly. He drags the body from the booth beneath silent high-arched ceilings, then flees into the night. Weeks pass. Mullen's father's voice is filled with disillusion. "It's time. You need precision now. A gun." He applies to the U.S. Marine Corps. Rejection comes when his criminal and psychiatric record is flagged. He spirals, thinking the rejection is staged by killjoy reincarnationalists, his parents, whoever sold him LSD. When his application is denied, Mullen slams his fist through a mirror. He gathers 2 .22 rifles, ammunition, and a folding map. His next strike will be the ultimate. He realizes high school acquaintance Jim Gianera, 25, once sold him weed. Jim was harmless, or worse, complicit in his mental ruin. Mullen drives to the Mystery Spot Road cabin, finds Jim gone, but meets Kathy Francis, 29, who shares his address. That night, a quiet street in Santa Cruz. He enters the Gianera home through the back window. Jim and Joan Gianera, 21, lie in bed. Mullen shoots Jim first, execution style, then Joan. He takes a moment, adjusting his grip on the rifle before doing it again. He exits, but he feels the need to continue. He then returns to Kathy's home and shoots her, then their 2 boys, David, 9, and Damon, 4, while they sleep. One final stab to each corpse, ritualistic. He checks his compass and breathes. Protecting California. One more sacrifice. He visits friends, talks about earthquakes and conspiracies. Blood debt. Most avoid him. News filters in. A priest found dead in a church confessional. Rumors of national press labeling it co-ed killer. None connect the dots. At Henry Cowell Redwoods State Park, Mullen becomes a self-styled ranger. He finds 4 teenage campers, boys, all lower 20s, sprawled amid tall redwoods. He sees pollution and fires, reporting it to his father.
They agreed. He steps forward.
"You're polluting."
They laugh.
He raises his rifle. 4 shots, quick and fatal. At the station, Mullen slumps, says nothing. Through processing, he stares unmoved. He shouts silence at every question. His eyes are empty, but inside, calculation roars. They search his house, uncover maps, rifles, tattered psychiatric pamphlets, earthquake studies, and a letter to his psychiatrist. "I've been given the burden of protection." When asked, Mullen claims responsibility for all 13 killings. Investigators, hearing Ed Kemper is in custody nearby, worry. Are we dealing with multiple monsters? They eventually realize the profile differs. Kemper hunts co-eds. Mullen kills random strangers, including children and priests. Once incarcerated, Mullen is placed in a cell adjacent to Kemper's. Ed Kemper, the 6'9" co-ed killer, visits. The two exchange words. Kemper tells him,
Sing in your cell? Shut him off with water. Good boy, here's a peanut.
a disturbing display of dominance disguised as therapy. Decades later, experts point to a cascade of failures. LSD flights left unchecked. Reagan-era closures drying up mental health support. Misdiagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia as delusional but harmless. Mullen's bizarre belief system and impulsive violence weren't prevented. They were pushed underground until too late. Mullen becomes a case study, the sacrificial serial killer, not for pleasure, not for power, but for tortured salvation. Santa Cruz, mid-1973. Mullen, gaunt and shuffling, enters a courtroom ringed with oak pews. Prosecutors lay out 13 deaths, some bodies scattered over mountains, others found in a church confessional, a camper grove, a family home. Defense paints a fractured psyche. Prosecution counters with premeditation and severity. Witnesses testify. A camp attendant describes finding 4 riddled bodies under towering redwoods. The Gianera Francis house, a crime scene of haunting silence, 4 lifeless bodies seen through forensic photographs. Father Tomei, killed in a sanctuary, beneath a painted saint. The jury hears from psychiatrists. Dr. Marlowe describes Mullen's paranoid schizophrenia, yet prosecutors cite his deliberate hunting trips, stolen rifles, and rational planning. He traveled, he hunted, he stopped in gas stations, he picked victims. Premeditated. Defense asserts, Mullen's beliefs were not based in reality. Voices commanding him to kill, earthquake, mistaken logic, apocalyptic guilt. He'd told surgeons after his arrest that he felt chosen, that the blood of his victims would make the earth stay still. Prosecution counters. He meticulously planned each killing, hiding corpses, waiting in ambush, following footprints back to homes. His victims were shot from behind. That, they argue, is intent, sanity. When asked if he understood the difference between right and wrong, Mullen replies flatly, "Of course." Late 1973. Guilty. 2 counts first degree, premeditation. 8 counts second degree, impulse murder. Separate trial later finds him guilty of the priest's second-degree killing. Life imprisonment. No possibility of parole for many decades. He is quietly led away. In Ione's Mule Creek State Prison, a unit houses notorious criminals. Here, Mullen and Edmund Kemper, both products of the late 60s Santa Cruz violence, are placed in adjoining cells. Their worlds collide. Kemper, towering and manipulative, observes Mullen pacing, occasionally singing hymns in a keening falsetto about the earth's wounds. Sometimes Mullen whispers to an imaginary audience. Sometimes, tears. Kemper, cold, clinical, tests him. Water splash when Mullen sings. Handful of peanuts when he's quiet. Positive reinforcement. He later says, Herbie had a lot of hate inside for people he didn't even know, but they shared an unspoken kinship. Institutionalization. Psychological fracture. Kemper, never hospitable, grows to call him a kindred spirit, an admission more chilling than any confession. As years pass, Mullen is denied parole. 8 times, most recently around 2021. Each hearing brings the same haunting question. Is he still a danger? Initially, hallucinations and paranoia were evident, but as decades crept by, his insight deepened. He stopped hearing earthquakes in the wind. He stopped believing every tremor had cosmic intention. Psychiatric panels begin to say, tension has lessened. He understands now that his own actions, not telepathy, led to deaths. But survivors' families and victims' advocates remain adamant. No parole. August 18, 2022. Mullen dies at 75 in Stockton's healthcare facility. Natural causes. News outlets note his lifespan, list his victims, and remind readers. He claimed to be saving the world, repeating that, "I tried to stop the earthquake." No public outcry, few comments mark the nuance. We still don't know if he was a man or a monster. They agreed, he once said, of the campers. They agreed. A chilling justification. A man convinced others willingly nodded, even when they were dead. I knew it all along. I was chosen. In earlier interviews, he confirmed his powerful self-belief that he was selected to hold calamity at bay. Survivors of families ask, he saved California, but never sorrow. Herbert Mullen's journey, popular kid, mentally unwell adult, murderous cultist of seismic suppression, reveals humanity's worst paradox, the impulse to heal the world by destroying life. It's easy to divide, sane and insane, man and monster. But Mullen lived between those lines. If we ever hope to prevent such tragedies, we must see both the danger and the need, the breakdown, the voice, the failure to intervene. Only then might we find pathways to stop a voice before it becomes a blood-soaked mandate. While the American public was glued to televisions, broadcasting the final days of the Manson family trial, and soldiers trudged through the humid jungles of Vietnam in a war fast becoming an unacknowledged defeat, a different kind of violence was germinating in the quiet hills above Santa Cruz, California. The country had developed a dangerous taste for madness. In the span of a few short years, it had become easier to believe that violence was no longer confined to bad neighborhoods or distant battlefields. It was at the rock concert, on the college campus, in the supermarket parking lot, in Hollywood mansions and suburban kitchens. Randomness had replaced motive, and it didn't help that Charles Manson's swastika-scarred face was still appearing in newspapers, a living argument that the counterculture had long since curdled into something malevolent. In Soquel, a small coastal town flanked by redwoods and fog, a mansion designed by a student of Frank Lloyd Wright sat atop a hill overlooking Monterey Bay. It was the kind of house you might imagine belonged to a man like Dr. Victor Ota, an affluent, respected ophthalmologist with a taste for modernist architecture and imported cars. By late October, the Odas had no reason to fear their surroundings. They were part of the elite, insulated by wealth, status, and the quiet exclusivity of their neighborhood. But somewhere nearby, a man named John Linley Frazier was listening to the voices in his head.
The Killer Prophet. Frazier's descent hadn't made headlines. There were no dramatic police chases or standoffs. His madness had unfolded in silence, deep in the woods where isolation can be both refuge and amplifier. A high school dropout with a petty criminal record, Frazier was a familiar type in Santa Cruz County. Scruffy, long-haired, with the 1,000-yard stare of someone tuned to a frequency only he could hear. What separated him from other disillusioned hippies was conviction. After a minor car accident a year earlier, Frazier became convinced that he had been chosen by God to deliver judgment upon materialists, those who, in his warped theology, were destroying the planet with their wealth and indifference. It was the end of the 1960s, and apocalyptic visions had seeped into the cultural bloodstream. From Woodstock to Altamont, utopian fantasies gave way to paranoia, cultism, and hard drugs. And Frazier, holed up in a makeshift cabin outside Soquel, fed himself a steady diet of Revelation passages and doomsday pamphlets. Neighbors considered him a harmless eccentric, a recluse who talked about trees and the end of the world but rarely did more than mutter to himself. What they didn't know was that in the weeks leading up to October 19, 1970, Frazier had begun stockpiling weapons and convincing himself that divine orders had arrived. Someone had to strike the first blow in a cosmic war between nature and industry. The Ota murders. It happened quickly. Frazier crept into the Ota residence, armed with a .38 caliber revolver. The victims, Dr. Ota, his wife Virginia, their two sons, Derek and Taggart, and Dorothy Cadwallader, a family secretary, were taken by surprise. No one screamed. There was no frantic 911 call. In the span of an afternoon, 5 people were executed, their bodies discarded into the family's swimming pool like garbage. Then Frazier typed a letter. Halloween 1970. Today World War III will begin, as brought to you by the people of the free universe. The note was full of apocalyptic declarations and threats against those who misused the natural environment. He signed it with a cryptic string of tarot card names: the Knight of Wands, Knight of Cups, Knight of Pentacles, Knight of Swords, as though assembling an army of spectral avengers. The mansion burned to the ground hours later. From a distance, neighbors spotted thick black smoke curling up through the pines, a grim column announcing the arrival of a new kind of killer. A town on the edge. Santa Cruz was already a place on edge. UC Santa Cruz had opened its doors 5 years earlier, bringing with it an influx of students, artists, and radicals. Local conservatives blamed the Longhairs for a surge in petty crime and narcotics arrests. The older generation, clinging to the postcard tranquility of the 1950s, viewed every hitchhiker and bead-wearing street musician as a possible Manson acolyte. In this tense climate, news of the Ota family's slaughter landed like a bomb. The Manson murders had proved that middle-class security was an illusion, but this was different. Santa Cruz wasn't Los Angeles. It was supposed to be safe. Here, you could build a glass-walled mansion on a hillside and feel a world away from the violence you saw on the evening news. And now, it seemed, the violence had come home. The manhunt. Frazier's arrest, days later, was almost anticlimactic. Sheriff's deputies Bradley Arbsland and Rodney Sanford found him sleeping in the brush near his cabin. The .38 was nearby. His clothes were filthy, his hair tangled. He spoke calmly, as though his capture was inevitable. And maybe it was. He told police he'd been instructed by God, that rich men were destroying the earth, that materialism would be mankind's undoing. In court, Frazier's appearance was part performance, part plea for martyrdom. One side of his head shaved, the other left scraggly and long, a living emblem of the war he believed he was fighting. Man versus machine, nature versus greed. The jury found him legally sane. He was sentenced to death. When California briefly abolished capital punishment in 1972, that sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. Legacy of fear. Frazier's crimes might have faded into regional infamy, remembered mostly by old-timers and true crime obsessives, were it not for what came next. Over the next 3 years, 2 more serial killers, Herbert Mullen and Edmund Kemper, would turn Santa Cruz into a hunting ground. Combined, the 3 men left more than 30 bodies in their wake. By the time national headlines dubbed Santa Cruz the murder capital of the world, it was clear that something larger was unfolding. Not a conspiracy, as Frazier had believed, but something more human, a society unable or unwilling to reckon with the dark undercurrents it had unleashed. Long before his name was written in police reports and court records, John Linley Frazier was a boy with a skateboard and a cigarette tucked behind one ear. Raised in Capitola, his early years left few obvious signs of the storm to come. Teachers remembered him as quiet, moody, not unintelligent, but uninterested in authority. His father left early, his mother remarried, and the new family dynamic was uneasy. In later interviews, friends would recall that Fraser hated being told what to do. If he resented anything, it was conformity. The late 1960s was a dangerous decade for people like him. Rootless, restless men prone to obsession. In another era, he might have stayed a minor drifter, a forgotten face in a booking photo. But in the California counterculture of the 60s, a man like Fraser could easily stumble upon apocalyptic literature in a commune library, or overhear acid-drenched conversations about the end times around a campfire in Big Sur. That kind of atmosphere doesn't create a killer, but it gives him language for the storm inside. What made Fraser distinct was not his violence. Countless men have murdered for worse reasons, but the grandiosity of his justification. He believed himself to be a prophet, not metaphorically, not symbolically, but literally chosen. In American criminal history, there exists a peculiar lineage of self-appointed executioners. Men like Charles Guiteau, who killed President Garfield claiming divine instruction, or Joseph Callinger, who murdered with his teenage son under orders from a floating, disembodied head named Charlie. These were not simple madmen. They were men whose delusions gave them a perverse clarity. Fraser joined their ranks not because of the scale of his violence, but because of its self-righteousness. He wasn't killing for money, for lust, or for sport. He was, in his own cracked theology, saving the world.
The fog crept in from the Pacific like a slow-moving tide, swallowing the trails of Mount Tamalpais in a pale, wet hush. The tall redwoods leaned into one another, their branches heavy with mist, turning even the most familiar footpaths into something unknowable. Hikers moved in and out of view, their footsteps muffled by damp earth and needlefall. For one man among them, this was no place of peace. For David Carpenter, the quiet was not a reprieve, it was a cover. Honest the Environments and Luber are children carpenters for David Schechter's Carpenter, returning to one man control them. Early life and the first signs. David Joseph Carpenter was born in San Francisco on May 6, 1930, into a household where the violence came early and stayed late. His father, Elwood, drank heavily and beat his son. His mother, Frances, domineered over every aspect of his young life. Bedwetting brought humiliation, and socialization was discouraged. Carpenter's only approved activities were violin lessons and ballet. He stuttered badly, a fact that made him a target for schoolyard cruelty at Glen Park Elementary. By adolescence, that cruelty turned inward and then outward. Carpenter began molesting children, including relatives. At age 17, he was arrested for the assault of a 3-year-old girl and committed to a mental institution. Doctors there noted an unusually high IQ of 125, but it wasn't enough to keep his escalating urges in check. A rape trial in 1950 ended in acquittal, but the pattern was set. A life of violence. In 1960, Carpenter worked at a San Francisco post office. He was friendly with a coworker named Lois D'Andrade, the mother of future actress Lisa Rinna. On July 11th, he offered Lois a ride, claiming he wanted her to meet his newborn child. When she hesitated, he insisted. Inside the car, his voice lost its stutter. His mask slipped. Moments later, Carpenter straddled Lois in the passenger seat, slashing her with a knife and battering her head with a hammer. A military policeman on patrol heard the struggle and intervened, shooting Carpenter in the stomach. Lois survived, but Carpenter spent just 7 years behind bars. During his assault trial, even Lois noted his stutter vanished when the violence took hold. The escalation. By the 1970s, Carpenter's crimes turned lethal. He kidnapped, raped, and assaulted women across California, once even escaping from jail during the Zodiac Killer scare. Desperate for notoriety, he boasted to fellow inmates that he was the infamous Zodiac, though police quickly ruled him out. Paroled in 1979, Carpenter moved back in with his aging parents in San Francisco. He took offset printing classes, attended vocational school, and learned to blend in again. But the trails called to him: solitude, control, and the chance to watch and wait. The murder spree begins. On October 21, 1979, 23-year-old Mary Bennett went jogging at Land's End. Carpenter dragged her into the underbrush, attempted to rape her, and stabbed her over 25 times, nearly decapitating her. Witnesses heard screams but assumed help was near when a police car passed. Carpenter showed up at an ER soon after, claiming a dog had bitten his thumb. It would take decades and DNA to confirm his guilt. The Mount Tam Killings. In 1980, Carpenter convinced a former prison pen pal to buy him a .38 caliber revolver. He carried it onto the Sky Camp Trail at Point Reyes National Seashore, where on October 11, he confronted young engaged couple Rick Stowers and Cynthia Moreland. He forced them to kneel, shot them execution style, and left their bodies in the brush. 4 days later, he ambushed 26-year-old Ann Alderson near the Cushing Memorial Amphitheater. A Peace Corps volunteer returned from Colombia. Alderson fought back, but was shot dead. Her murder shut down Mount Tamalpais trails. Then came Diane O'Connell and Shauna May, both educated, both alone on the trails, both shot and left in the undergrowth. The Marin County Investigation. Authorities dubbed the unknown killer the Mount Tam Killer. A fugitive, Mark McDermott, was briefly suspected after killing his mother and brother, but murders continued after his arrest. A profile painted a portrait of a misogynist who thrived on fear and begged for mercy. Police received anonymous phone calls from a man claiming to be the killer, protesting the psychological profile and promising surrender. The calls abruptly stopped. Santa Cruz and final capture. In March 1981, Carpenter shifted south to Santa Cruz County. At Henry Cowell Redwood State Park, he confronted college students Ellen Hansen and Stephen Herdel. When Hansen refused to submit to rape, Carpenter shot her multiple times. Herdel survived a neck wound and would later help identify Carpenter. David Carpenter was arrested in May 1981. He was convicted of multiple murders and sentenced to death in both Los Angeles and San Diego counties. DNA evidence decades later linked him definitively to the murder of Mary Bennett. As of today, at 95 years old, David Carpenter is the oldest inmate on California's death row. He continues to live at the California Healthcare Facility. His story is a reminder that the most dangerous men do not always announce themselves. Sometimes they wait in the quiet places, where the trails narrow, where the fog thickens, where no one is watching. In the dimly lit neighborhoods of Los Angeles during the mid-1980s, a chilling presence haunted the dreams of countless families. Windows left ajar for the stifling heat were no longer portals to the night's cool embrace, but gateways to terror. This was the era of the Night Stalker, a name whispered with dread, a predator who slipped through the shadows, leaving behind a trail of violence so brutal and random that the city itself seemed paralyzed by fear. Richard Ramirez, the man behind the infamous moniker, struck with savage unpredictability. Between 1984 and 1985,
He committed a spree of home invasions, rapes, murders, and burglaries that confounded law enforcement and shattered communities. His reign of terror culminated in a spectacular capture, a mob justice scene fueled by citizen outrage, and a courtroom trial marked by his own brazen defiance and satanic symbolism. Sentenced to death in 1989, Ramirez would spend nearly 3 decades in California's death row, eluding execution while his crimes continued to haunt public memory. Yet his death would not come by lethal injection or gas chamber as the law decreed, but quietly, in a hospital bed in 2013, a victim of cancer and chronic illness, a demise far removed from the terror he once wrought. This narrative explores the full arc of Richard Ramirez's story, from his early descent into darkness, through his grisly crimes and courtroom theatrics, to his long incarceration, final days, and lasting legacy on society and culture. It is a story of evil's complexity, justice's limits, and the chilling ways violence imprints itself on a city's soul. Richard Ramirez was born Ricardo Leyva Muñoz Ramirez on February 29, 1960, in El Paso, Texas, a city straddling the border of the United States and Mexico. His childhood was marked by a blend of neglect, abuse, and exposure to violence that would foreshadow his dark future. From an early age, Ramirez exhibited troubling behavior. He was introduced to the brutal world of violence, not just through his own family, but also through his cousin, a Vietnam War veteran, who regaled him with grisly stories and photographs from the battlefield. The cousin's tales of bloodshed and death, combined with the young boy's exposure to domestic violence and his own violent tendencies, seeded a growing fascination with death and cruelty.
By adolescence, Ramirez was experimenting with drugs and alcohol, already committing petty crimes. His fascination with Satanism emerged during this period, heavily influenced by the occult imagery that permeated certain countercultures of the 1970s and 1980s. Tattoos and symbols, including pentagrams, would later become a chilling hallmark of his identity. The path from troubled youth to serial killer was neither linear nor sudden, but a slow descent marked by repeated brushes with the law, drug addiction, and escalating violent fantasies. Those who crossed paths with Ramirez during his young adulthood often saw a volatile mix of charm and menace, the makings of a predator lurking beneath a deceptive exterior. It was in the spring of 1984 that Richard Ramirez began a calculated, merciless rampage that would terrorize Southern California. His crimes were varied and unpredictable, defying the typical patterns law enforcement used to anticipate and capture serial offenders. Ramirez's modus operandi was brutal and opportunistic. He gained entry through unlocked doors and windows, often in the dead of night, earning him the nickname Night Stalker. His attacks ranged from home invasions, burglaries, and sexual assaults to cold-blooded murder. The weapons he wielded were diverse, from handguns to knives, even tire irons, reflecting a savage improvisation. The randomness of his targets, young, old, male, female, affluent or modest, frustrated investigators and terrified residents. No one felt safe behind closed doors. The sheer brutality of his attacks, often including mutilation and satanic symbols left at crime scenes, gave rise to a pervasive sense of helplessness and panic. One particularly horrifying aspect was his tendency to taunt police and the public. Ramirez left cryptic messages and pentagrams scrawled on walls or on his own body, intensifying the public's fear and fascination. As the death toll climbed to at least 13 known victims and many more survived assaults, the city braced itself for the possibility of more violence. The capture of Richard Ramirez is a story of ordinary citizens rising in extraordinary circumstances, fueled by fear and righteous anger. By late August 1985, Ramirez had eluded law enforcement for over a year. striking terror throughout the Los Angeles area. His faces and crimes were splashed across every newspaper and television screen. His mugshot etched into the public consciousness. Yet the killer moved with a deadly confidence, slipping through the city's dark corners like a ghost. On August 31, 1985, Ramirez traveled to East Los Angeles, reportedly to visit family. After failing to meet his brother, he wandered into a convenience store, unaware that the area was on high alert. Inside, several elderly Hispanic women recognized him immediately from media coverage. Fear turned to action as they yelled warnings, calling him El Matador, the killer. Ramirez fled the store, running across the busy Santa Ana freeway. In his desperation, he attempted to carjack a Ford Mustang. But the car's owner and local residents sprang into action. Faustino Pinon and Jose Burgoyne pulled him from the vehicle. And as Ramirez struggled, a crowd of more than 10 people gathered. The group chased him down Hubbard Street, where he was beaten and restrained until police arrived. This dramatic scene, often described as a form of street justice, was met with a mix of relief and controversy. The violent capture was brutal, but many saw it as necessary to end the spree of horror Ramirez had unleashed. Ramirez's trial began nearly 3 years after his arrest, on July 22, 1988. It was one of the most high-profile and costly criminal trials in California history at the time. From the outset, Ramirez appeared defiant and unrepentant. At his first court appearance, he raised a hand adorned with a pentagram and shouted, "Hail Satan!" a chilling declaration that underscored the dark symbolism he embraced throughout the case. The prosecution faced a monumental task, presenting evidence from dozens of attacks involving 13 murders, multiple attempted murders, sexual assaults, and burglaries. Over the months, survivors, forensic experts, and witnesses testified, revealing the horrifying details of Ramirez's violent rampage. Ramirez himself was a spectacle in court. At one point, jail employees overheard him plotting to shoot the prosecutor, leading to increased security measures including metal detectors at the courthouse. Just shy of his 54th birthday, he had been transferred there from San Quentin State Prison, where he had been on death row for nearly 24 years. Despite being sentenced to death in 1989, Ramirez never faced execution. California's lengthy and complicated appeals process, combined with the general slowdown of the death penalty system in the state, meant that Ramirez remained alive and incarcerated until his natural death. His death stirred mixed reactions. For many survivors and victims' families, the fact that Ramirez evaded execution was a bitter disappointment. Bill Carnes, one of Ramirez's last victims, told the Los Angeles Times, "He should have been put to death an awful long time ago." For others, the slow march toward death behind bars represented a form of justice, a prolonged punishment filled with reflection and loss of freedom. The Night Stalker's own final words are unknown, but his defiant statements during sentencing echoed a chilling acceptance. "Big deal. Death always went with the territory. See you in Disneyland." Whether those words were bravado or resignation, Ramirez's life ended quietly and without the theatrical finality his crimes seemed to demand. Lasting fear and cultural impact. Ramirez's reign of terror left an indelible mark on Los Angeles and the surrounding communities. The random nature of his attacks shattered any illusion of safety in ordinary homes. People installed security bars on windows, locked doors they might previously have left open, and lived in a constant state of vigilance. His crimes exposed weaknesses in law enforcement's ability to track a highly mobile, unpredictable serial offender. The Night Stalker's use of multiple weapons, attack methods, and victim profiles baffled police and complicated the investigation. Beyond law enforcement and victims, Ramirez's name entered the collective cultural psyche.
he became a figure of horror, fascination, and morbid curiosity, inspiring books, films, documentaries, and television shows that explore the psychology of evil and the dark corners of the human mind. Media and pop culture. The Night Stalker's story has been told and retold across multiple platforms. The 2021 Netflix docuseries Night Stalker: The Hunt for a Serial Killer revisited the investigation, emphasizing the painstaking police work and citizen involvement that led to Ramirez's capture. In cinema, the 2016 film The Night Stalker and the 2024 film Maxine depict his crimes and impact on Southern California. His persona even appears in episodes of American Horror Story and numerous true crime podcasts. The cultural obsession with Ramirez raises complex, ethical questions about glorifying criminals versus understanding their psychology and the societal conditions that allow such horrors to happen. The making of a killer. Richard Ramirez's childhood and upbringing provide clues to the development of his violent tendencies. Raised in a troubled family, exposed to violence and abuse, and fascinated by satanic imagery and violent media, Ramirez's early life was marked by instability and trauma. Experts believe that a combination of genetic predispositions, environmental influences, and psychological disorders culminated in his violent behavior. His fascination with Satanism and occult symbols has been interpreted as a manifestation of his rebellion, alienation, and desire for power. The role of mental illness and society. Ramirez was diagnosed with multiple mental health issues, though the court never accepted insanity pleas. His actions also highlight failures in social systems, inadequate mental health care, lack of intervention during early signs of pathology, and systemic blind spots that allowed his crimes to escalate. His case is often studied in criminology and psychology to better understand the factors contributing to serial killing and to improve prevention and intervention strategies. Richard Ramirez's life and crimes stand as a haunting testament to the depths of human depravity. The randomness, brutality, and seeming senselessness of his acts struck fear into an entire region, disrupting lives and changing community behaviors for generations. Though he died behind bars, never executed as his sentence prescribed, Ramirez's legacy endures in the collective memory of his victims, the city he terrorized, and the society that sought to comprehend the nature of evil. The story of the Night Stalker is not just a tale of horror. It is a call to vigilance, compassion, and understanding of the psychological and societal factors that breed such monsters. Only by learning from the past can we hope to prevent such darkness from descending again.
A quiet cell, locked forever. In a dimly lit cell at a high-security prison, John Bruce Childs sits quietly, his gaze distant but steady. The weight of decades behind bars presses not only on his body, but on the spaces where his life unfolded. 6 brutal murders, a trail of destruction carefully hidden beneath layers of silence and denial. Outside the narrow window, the cold gray light of dawn filters through, revealing nothing of the past horrors, only the unyielding present. Child's attorneys have petitioned for a chance at parole, a flicker of hope amid the shadows. But the judge's ruling leaves no room for such hopes. The enormity of his crimes places him among those destined to die within these walls, a fact rendered absolute in cold legal terms. Childs, now 77, confessed to slaughtering 6 men. Terrence Eve, Robert Brown, George Brett, Terry Brett, Frederick Sherwood, and Ronald Andrews in the 1970s. The youngest victim, Terry Brett, was only 10 years old when he was killed after witnessing his father's murder. All 6 bodies were dismembered and burned, the acts methodical and clinical, erasing physical evidence in a grim effort to conceal. The details emerged slowly, pieced together in courtrooms and interviews, each confession weighed against disbelief and the unsettling unreliability of Child's own words. 2 men, convicted partly on his testimony, were eventually freed after spending more than 2 decades imprisoned, their innocence a reminder of the limits of trust placed in a confessed killer. Diagnosed with an antisocial personality disorder, marked by an insatiable need for admiration, Child's story is one of contradictions. A narcissistic psychopath whose drive for attention belied a chilling absence of empathy, he admitted to acts of violence that exposed a ruthless mind behind a carefully constructed facade. His confessions describe dismembering victims at his East London flat and implicating others, allegations that unraveled in court, though his lawyers argued the murders were unsophisticated and lacked clear premeditation. The presiding judge rejected this view outright. The calculated brutality of the killings, the cold disposal of bodies, and the impact on families marked Child's crimes as exceptional in severity. The court decreed that Childs would serve a whole life sentence, a permanent confinement matched only by the magnitude of his offenses. A quiet town, haunted. Far west in California's coastal stretches, Terry Childs' name came to define a more recent but equally grim chapter of serial violence. Born in 1955 in Santa Clara County, Childs' early life was marked by instability, drug use, and brushes with the law. By his late 20s, his record had already begun to darken with robbery and violent offenses. But it was the series of murders from 1979 to 1985 that sealed his fate. At 29, Childs was arrested for possession of a weapon, but investigations soon linked him to the murder of 17-year-old Lois Janine Segala, found shot 15 times in Scotts Valley. The shooting was a violent crescendo to years of escalating criminal behavior. Segala, a runaway who had lived with Childs and his girlfriend, was accused of being an informant, a suspicion that ended in her murder. The evidence was largely circumstantial but compelling. Ballistic tests tied bullets to a Luger handgun linked to Childs. Witness accounts placed Segala near Childs' vehicle. His girlfriend's testimony, secured under threat, painted a harrowing picture of manipulation and violence. Despite Childs' claims of mental illness, including paranoid schizophrenia fueled by long-term drug abuse, the jury found him guilty, sentencing him to life with the possibility of parole after 41 years. Years later, confined within the harsh conditions of supermax prisons after an assault on a fellow inmate, Childs began confessing to more killings, 11 additional murders across multiple counties and even states. His admissions included detailed knowledge only the killer would know, locations of bodies, specifics of attacks. Some confessions led to new convictions, including the murder of Linda Ann Josevich, whose remains were discovered years after her disappearance. His motivations, tangled with drug addiction, paranoia, and violence, echoed the chaotic trajectory of a man whose crimes were as varied as his victims, ranging from runaways to acquaintances, victims of rage and suspicion. Childs' final years in prison were spent pleading guilty to multiple murders, ensuring he would remain confined without parole. These two stories, separated by geography and decades, are bound by a shared pattern of violence and a judicial reckoning that offers no mercy. John, Bruce, Childs, and Terry Childs, names etched into the history of American crime, remain locked away, lives contained, but never forgotten by those left to piece together the aftermath of their actions.